Hi, I'm Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
The November fog pressed against the windows of our Baker Street lodgings with the persistence of an unwelcome creditor, transforming the familiar bustle of London into a muffled symphony of distant voices and echoing footsteps. Holmes reclined upon the settee, his long fingers coaxing melancholy notes from his violin, while I sat near the fire with the evening papers, finding little of interest beyond the usual catalogue of political machinations and social scandals. The tranquil domesticity of our evening was shattered by an urgent rap upon our door, followed by Mrs. Hudson's announcement of a gentleman in considerable distress. Mr. Victor Harcourt entered our sitting-room with the bearing of a man accustomed to command, yet his composure had been thoroughly shaken by whatever calamity had driven him through the fog to our door. He was well dressed in the manner of theatrical management, with an eye for presentation that extended to his person, but his hands trembled as he removed his hat, and his usually confident demeanour had given way to barely controlled agitation. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I come to you in desperation," he began, his voice carrying the trained projection of one familiar with the stage. "I am the manager of the Imperial Theatre on the Strand, and we have been visited by a catastrophe so impossible in its nature that I fear for both justice and sanity. One of our principal actors lies dead, killed by a weapon that could not have harmed him, witnessed by a dozen souls who can make no sense of what they saw." Holmes set aside his violin with the languid grace that masked his quickening interest. "Pray be seated, Mr. Harcourt. You speak of impossibilities, which are always of interest to me. Begin with the facts, if you please, and leave conjecture for later consideration." Harcourt settled into the offered chair, accepting the brandy I provided with a grateful nod. We were conducting our final dress rehearsal this afternoon for a new melodrama, The Vengeance of Verona. Our leading man, Mr. Edwin Lemaire, was engaged in the climactic scene with Miss Sybil Drake, our principal actress. The scene calls for her to threaten him with a dagger in a moment of passion, then appear to strike him down in a fit of rage. The blade, of course, is a theatrical property designed for safety. It retracts into the handle upon contact, causing no harm whatsoever. "And yet harm was done," Holmes observed, his grey eyes fixed upon our visitor with hawk-like intensity. "Indeed, Mr. Holmes, when Miss Drake struck at Lemaire's chest, he cried out in genuine agony, staggered backward, and collapsed upon the stage with blood spreading across his shirt front. We rushed to his aid, but it was too late. He was quite dead, apparently stabbed through the heart. Yet when we examined the weapon, this very knife I carry with me, it showed its familiar, harmless nature. The blade slides back as it was designed to do. It could not have inflicted a mortal wound upon anyone." Holmes extended his hand, and Harcourt produced the theatrical dagger from his coat. My friend examined it with the methodical attention he brought to all mechanical devices, testing the spring mechanism and inspecting the craftsmanship. "You are certain this is the same weapon used in the scene?" "Absolutely certain. Our property master, Mr. Jonas Pugh, maintains strict control over all weapons and dangerous implements. The knife was locked in his care until the rehearsal began, and returned to him immediately afterward. There could be no substitution." "Yet there was blood," I interjected, my medical training compelling me to focus upon the physical evidence. "Abundant blood, Dr. Watson, and unmistakably real. Our theatre physician examined the body and confirmed death by stabbing, yet he could find no wound corresponding to the blade. The shirt was torn, but the skin beneath remained intact. It defies all medical understanding." Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingertips pressed together in his characteristic pose of concentration. "Who else was present during this rehearsal?" The full company was upon the stage or in the wings, perhaps a dozen souls in total. Our call boy, the gasman attending to repairs, several carpenters completing work on the scenery. Inspector Lestrade has already questioned them all and fixed his suspicions upon Miss Drake. On what grounds? Harcourt's expression grew troubled. She and Le Maire had quarrelled bitterly the previous day. Their personal relationship was tempestuous, and the entire company was aware of their difficulties. Moreover, a crimson thread matching her costume was found caught upon the knife's guard. Lestrade considers the matter settled, but I cannot believe Miss Drake capable of such an act, nor can I comprehend how it might have been accomplished. Holmes rose with sudden decision, reaching for his coat and hat. Watson, we have a most intriguing puzzle before us. Mr. Harcourt, you shall have our immediate attention. I trust the scene remains undisturbed. By your specific instruction, which I took the liberty of anticipating, nothing has been moved. The stage awaits your examination exactly as we found it. Excellent. Come then, gentlemen, let us visit this theatre where knives that cannot cut have somehow learned to kill. The game, as they say, is afoot. As we descended into the fog-shrouded street, I found myself contemplating the central impossibility of the case. How could a harmless theatrical prop become an instrument of death? What force could produce a fatal wound while leaving the weapon itself unchanged? The case of the knife that never cut promised to challenge every assumption about the nature of murder itself, and I sensed that before its resolution we would discover that the greatest illusions are not always performed upon the stage. The fog thickened as our hansom rattled through the labyrinthine streets toward the Strand. The car gas lamps casting wavering halos that seemed to retreat before our approach. Holmes had fallen into one of his contemplative silences, but as we neared our destination, his keen gaze fixed upon our companion with sudden interest. "Mr. Harcourt," he remarked, with characteristic precision, "I observe that your recent ordeal has involved more than the discovery of poor Le Maire's body. The faint smudge of carmine grease paint upon your left cuff, combined with the delicate scent of patchouli that clings to your waistcoat, suggests you have been offering comfort to one of your female performers. The slight tear in your sleeve indicates this consolation was rather more emotional than professional decorum might typically permit." Harcourt flushed deeply, his composure cracking further. Miss Eleanor Vance, one of our chorus girls, was quite beside herself after the tragedy. I merely sought to provide what comfort I could in such dreadful circumstances. "Naturally," Holmes replied with a thin smile. "The observation serves merely to illustrate that even in moments of crisis, human nature asserts itself in predictable patterns. Now then, let us examine what patterns emerge from this impossible crime." The Imperial Theatre loomed before us through the mist, like a monument to human artifice, its ornate facade gleaming wetly under the struggling gaslight. A constable stood guard at the stage door, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air. Within, the familiar theatrical atmosphere of dust, old velvet, and extinguished gas enveloped us as Harcourt led us through narrow corridors toward the stage. We found Inspector Lestrade already in possession of the scene, his expression bearing that particular smugness that indicated he considered the matter well in hand. "Ah, Mr. Holmes," he greeted us with barely concealed triumph. "You arrived just in time to witness the conclusion of a most straightforward affair. The lady's temper overcame her judgment, and the rest is merely paperwork." Holmes accepted this pronouncement with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for stale bread. "Let us examine the facts before we embrace conclusions, Lestrade. The stage, if you please." The Imperial stage was larger than I had anticipated, set with painted backdrops depicting a Renaissance palazzo and marked with chalk lines indicating the positions of the principals during the fatal scene. Holmes immediately began his systematic examination, his magnifying glass appearing as though conjured by the very theatrical magic that surrounded us. "Dr. Watson," he called, kneeling beside the dark stain that marked where Lemaire had fallen. "Your medical expertise is required. What strikes you about this blood evidence?" I joined him in examining the stains upon the boards, my training asserting itself despite the macabre circumstances. The quantity seems excessive for a single wound, yet the distribution is remarkably contained. More puzzling still, portions appear to have congealed at different rates. See here where it remains almost liquid, while this section has formed the skin typical of blood exposed to air for hours. Capital observation. The blood tells a story quite different from the obvious narrative. Holmes rose and examined the theatrical dagger that Harcourt produced from its case. The blade retracted smoothly into the handle with a soft click, demonstrating its harmless nature beyond any doubt. "Now then," Holmes continued, "I require an interview with your property master, Mr. Pugh, and any others who were present during the rehearsal. Miss Drake, I presume, remains under Lestrade's watchful eye." "Released on her own recognizance," Harcourt replied. "Though she is forbidden to leave London, the poor woman maintains her innocence with considerable vehemence, but the evidence appears damning to those who lack your particular insights." Lestrade snorted. "Evidence is evidence, Mr. Holmes. The woman had motive, opportunity, and a crimson thread from her costume was found upon the weapon's guard. What more could any reasonable person require?" "Reason, my dear Lestrade, demands that we explain not merely who committed the crime, but how it was possible for the crime to be committed at all. A knife that cannot cut has somehow learned to kill. Until we understand the method, we understand nothing." As if summoned by our discussion, a nervous man with a carpenter's pencil behind his ear approached from the wings. "Jonas Pugh," Harcourt introduced, "our property master." "I kept that blade locked as always," Pugh protested, before anyone could speak. "No one touches steel in my house without my knowledge." Holmes studied the man with interest. "Yet steel has touched someone, Mr. Pugh, with fatal consequence. The question that remains is how such an impossibility was achieved." Pugh's weathered hands trembled as he produced a ring of keys from his leather apron, his defensive pride evident in every gesture. "23 years I've managed properties in this theatre, Mr. Holmes," he declared, leading us down a narrow staircase beneath the stage. "Never once has a performer been injured by my equipment. Every blade is tested, every mechanism inspected before it leaves my care." The property room existed in a realm of organized theatrical chaos, where the mundane tools of illusion crowded shelves and cabinets in meticulous arrangement. Swords, shields, crowns, and goblets bore the careful cataloguing of a man who understood that a misplaced prop could destroy an entire production. Holmes examined this domain with his characteristic thoroughness, his keen eyes noting not merely what was present, but the patterns of use and storage that might reveal hidden truths. "This retractable dagger, Mr. Pugh?" Holmes inquired. "How many such weapons do you maintain in your collection?" "3 in total, sir. All identical, purchased from Hartwell and Sons in Birmingham, the finest theatrical weapons available. Designed specifically for stage combat, the spring mechanism is absolutely foolproof. Yet fools, as we know, are remarkably resourceful in their ingenuity." Holmes approached a locked cabinet containing the theatre's collection of edged weapons, its interior lined with felt, and each item secured in its designated position. "Show me precisely where this particular knife was stored." Pugh unlocked the cabinet with visible reluctance, revealing the careful arrangement within. "The dagger rested here until this morning's rehearsal call. I personally handed it to Miss Drake, as is my custom for all weapons." She returned it immediately after the tragedy, and I secured it until Mr. Harcourt requested it for your examination." Holmes studied the cabinet's contents with his magnifying glass, then paused, his attention fixed upon a particular section of the felt lining. "Most interesting. Mr. Pugh, I observe an empty space here outlined in dust. What weapon typically occupies this position?" The property master's face went pale as he consulted his inventory ledger with shaking fingers. "An Italian stiletto, 16th century, blade length 6 inches, handle decorated with garnets. It has been missing for nearly a week now. I assumed one of the actors had borrowed it without proper authorization, though I discourage such practices." "A week, you say? When precisely did you discover its absence?" "Monday morning. During my weekly inspection and cleaning, the piece simply was not in its accustomed place." Holmes nodded thoughtfully, his grey eyes taking on that particular intensity I had learned to recognize. "And would the dimensions of this missing stiletto correspond to the wound that killed Mr. Lemaire?" Harcourt shifted uncomfortably. "I am no medical expert, Mr. Holmes, but the description would seem entirely consistent with what our physician observed." "Then we begin to perceive the true architecture of our mystery?" Holmes sealed the cabinet and turned his attention to our ascent back to the stage level. "A harmless theatrical dagger somehow becomes an instrument of death, while a genuine antique blade disappears from supposedly secure storage. The question becomes one of substitution, timing, and opportunity." Upon the stage, Holmes began his methodical examination of the crime scene with the precision of a surgeon. He knelt beside the congealed blood, studying not merely the pool itself, but the surrounding floorboards with minute attention. His magnifying glass revealed details invisible to ordinary observation as he traced the edges of the crimson stain, noting the patterns of splatter and the precise angles of distribution. "Mr. Davies?" Holmes called to the stage manager, a portly man who had been hovering nervously in the wings. "You stated that you personally retrieved the dagger after the incident. Was it handled by anyone else before its return to Mr. Pugh?" "Only myself, Mr. Holmes," Davies replied, adjusting his spectacles with obvious discomfort. "I picked it up from where it had fallen and carried it directly to Jonas. I was careful to handle only the hilt, not the blade mechanism." Holmes extended his examination outward from the bloodstain, his keen gaze cataloguing seemingly insignificant details. A loose nail near the stage left wing drew his attention, as did a faint scuff mark on the painted backdrop that appeared inconsistent with the artistic design. He paused to examine a tiny fragment of what appeared to be dried clay lodged between 2 floorboards, carefully extracting it with his pocket knife and sealing it in a small envelope. "And Lemaire, in his final moments," Holmes continued his questioning, while maintaining his systematic search, "did he make any utterance that might be construed as significant? Any gesture or word that seemed directed toward a particular individual?" Davies shook his head with evident distress. "Only a terrible choked gasp, Mr. Holmes. Then he collapsed. It happened so quickly that none of us fully comprehended what we were witnessing until it was too late." Holmes straightened from his examination, his attention now focused on the precise positioning where the fatal scene had unfolded. He measured distances with practiced steps, triangulating Lemaire's position relative to the painted scenery and stage furniture. His fingers brushed lightly over the floorboards, and I observed him pause at one particular spot, his head tilted in concentration. Moving to the wings, Holmes scrutinized the complex system of ropes and pulleys that controlled the theatre's scenery, his gaze lingering on mechanisms used to raise and lower the painted flats. He even peered into the depths of the orchestra pit, as though some crucial evidence might be concealed among the forgotten sheet music and accumulated dust of countless performances. Lestrade, who had been observing these proceedings with barely concealed impatience, finally voiced his frustration. "Mr. Holmes, surely you cannot believe that examining dust and splinters will explain how Miss Drake managed to accomplish this impossible crime. The evidence of her guilt remains overwhelming, regardless of these theatrical mysteries." "The evidence of someone's guilt is certainly present, Lestrade," Holmes replied with that thin smile I knew so well. "Whether that someone is Miss Drake remains to be determined through proper investigation rather than premature conclusion." As Holmes completed his examination, I noticed him pocket what appeared to be an almost invisible splinter of wood he had carefully extracted from between the floorboards. His expression suggested the dawning of comprehension, though he shared none of his deductions with the rest of us. The puzzle was clearly far from solved, but I recognized the signs that indicated my friend was beginning to perceive the true nature of this seemingly impossible murder. "Come, Watson," he said at length, his voice carrying that particular note of satisfaction that indicated progress in his reasoning. "We must now hear Miss Drake's account of these events. The lady's testimony may provide the final pieces necessary to complete our understanding of this most ingenious deception." Miss Sybil Drake's dressing room occupied a cramped corner of the theatre's backstage labyrinth, its walls adorned with the accumulated memorabilia of a distinguished career. She sat before her mirror in a simple dark dress, her stage makeup removed to reveal features marked by exhaustion and strain. The familiar theatrical scents of grease paint and powder mingled with the more delicate fragrance of the violets that adorned her dressing table, creating an atmosphere both intimate and melancholy. Holmes approached with the measured courtesy he reserved for witnesses whose testimony might prove crucial. He placed the retractable dagger upon her dressing table with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. "Miss Drake, I require your most exact recollection of this afternoon's events, not your emotions or interpretations, but the precise physical details of what occurred." She drew herself up with the composure that had served her well upon the stage, though I detected the tremor in her hands as she regarded the weapon. "I received the dagger from Mr. Pugh immediately before our entrance, as is his invariable custom. The weight felt familiar, the balance unchanged from countless previous rehearsals. When the fatal moment arrived, I struck at Edwin's chest with the force the scene demanded." "And the weapon's response?" Holmes inquired, his grey eyes fixed upon her face with hawk-like intensity. "There was something different, Mr. Holmes. The blade retracted, as it always did, with that familiar click of the spring mechanism, but there was also a tremor through the handle, as though some secondary action had occurred. I thought perhaps I had struck at an awkward angle, but the sensation was unlike anything I had experienced in previous performances." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "This tremor, was it simultaneous with the blade's retraction, or did it follow?" Miss Drake closed her eyes, clearly reliving those terrible moments. "It seemed to follow, as though the weapon had performed its intended function and then something else entirely had taken place." Edwin's expression changed instantly from theatrical performance to genuine shock and pain. His eyes widened, and he looked not at me but past me, as though he had seen something in the wings that filled him with sudden terror. "What did he see, do you suppose?" "I cannot say. The lighting was arranged for the scene, casting deep shadows in the wings. Any number of our company might have been present, watching from the darkness, as is their custom during rehearsals." Holmes examined the dagger once more, testing its mechanism with the methodical attention I had observed him bring to countless pieces of evidence. "Miss Drake, in the days preceding this tragedy, did Mr. Lemaire speak of any concerns beyond the usual theatrical anxieties, any fears or apprehensions that seemed to weigh upon his mind?" Her composure wavered slightly. Edwin had been increasingly troubled of late. He spoke of enemies he had made, of past indiscretions that might return to haunt him. There was a particular bitterness in his manner when he mentioned his previous engagement in Manchester, though he would never elaborate upon the specific nature of his concerns. Did he mention names, specific individuals who might wish him harm? Only in the most general terms. He feared that his success had bred resentment among his fellow performers. Mr. Blackwood, our juvenile lead, had grown increasingly bitter about being overshadowed. Miss Eleanor Vance had conceived a romantic attachment that Edwin did not reciprocate, leading to considerable tension within the company. Even our stage manager, Mr. Davies, had clashed with Edwin over matters of artistic interpretation. Holmes rose and moved to examine the costumes hanging upon their hooks, his keen gaze noting details that escaped ordinary observation. He paused before Miss Drake's crimson velvet gown, studying the fabric with his magnifying glass. "The thread discovered upon the dagger's guard. Inspector Lestrade considers it damning evidence of your guilt." "The thread is meaningless, Mr. Holmes. This costume sheds constantly. We are forever adjusting, mending, making alterations. Such a thread could have been deposited at any time during our preparations." Yet it was found specifically upon the weapon's guard, in a position suggesting recent contact. Holmes returned the glass to his pocket, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Drake, when you struck the fatal blow, did you observe any unusual sounds from the orchestra pit or wings, any movement or disturbance that seemed inconsistent with a normal rehearsal?" She considered carefully. "Now that you mention it, there was a sound just before Edwin fell, a soft click, distinct from the dagger's mechanism. It seemed to come from beneath the stage, though I cannot be certain given the confusion of the moment." Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with me, and I recognized the signs of his growing comprehension. "One final question. During your time with this company, have you noticed any changes in the theatre's physical arrangements, new equipment, alterations to the stage machinery, unusual visitors to the property rooms?" "Mr. Davies has been overseeing repairs to the trap mechanisms beneath the stage. There have been workmen about for the past week, and I have observed strangers in areas typically restricted to company members. I assumed they were connected to the renovations." Holmes moved toward the door with sudden decision. "Miss Drake, you have been most illuminating. I believe your account contains elements that will prove essential to our understanding of these events, though the full truth may prove more shocking than even this apparent impossibility." As we departed her dressing room, Holmes's expression carried that particular intensity I had learned to associate with the moment when scattered clues began to form a coherent pattern. "Watson," he murmured as we walked through the theatre's dimly lit corridors, "we are dealing with a crime of remarkable ingenuity, one that transforms the very stage into an instrument of murder. The killer has used the theatre's own mechanisms against it, creating an illusion so perfect that even the perpetrator appears innocent of the deed." The fog seemed to press more closely about the theatre as we emerged into the London night, but I sensed that Holmes was drawing nearer to the solution of this most baffling mystery. The impossible had been made to seem possible through human cunning, and soon that cunning would be exposed to the harsh light of justice. The fog had scarcely closed about us when Holmes halted beneath the stage door's gaslight, his keen eyes reflecting that particular intensity I had learned to associate with a crucial breakthrough in his reasoning. "Watson," he said with sudden decision, "Miss Drake's account of that distinctive click from beneath the stage demands immediate investigation. The theatre's mechanical modifications may prove more significant than even she realizes." Within moments we had retraced our steps, Holmes presenting his credentials to the constable with the authority that opened doors throughout London's criminal investigations. Mr. Davies appeared with obvious reluctance, his portly frame moving with the careful deliberation of one navigating unfamiliar territory as he led us down the iron steps into the theatre's subterranean realm. The basement beneath the Imperial Theatre revealed itself as a marvel of Victorian engineering, where massive wooden wheels, hemp ropes, and counterweights created the invisible machinery of theatrical illusion. Holmes moved through this mechanical landscape with the sure instincts of a bloodhound, his trained eye cataloguing each detail of the complex apparatus that controlled the stage above. The familiar theatrical sense of dust and old timber mingled with the sharper odours of machine oil and fresh wood shavings. "Observe, Watson," Holmes said, kneeling beside a recently installed mechanism positioned directly beneath the chalked mark he had noted on the stage above. "This apparatus has been constructed within the past week. The wood shavings scattered about its base are still fresh, and note the precision of its engineering, far more sophisticated than the older installations surrounding it." I examined the device he indicated, noting immediately its unusual configuration. A small wooden lever, fashioned from what appeared to be a carpenter's rule and pivoted upon a brass screw, was connected to a thin rubber tube that disappeared into the shadows between two massive joists. Holmes traced this tube with his magnifying glass revealing dark stains upon its surface that bore an ominous resemblance to dried blood. "Most ingenious," Holmes murmured, following the tube to its terminus, where a collapsed bladder of India rubber had been tucked cunningly into a concealed recess. The bladder wore the faint metallic odour of a slaughterhouse, and Holmes's examination revealed it to be stained with what was unmistakably blood. A simple siphon system, Watson, operated by this lever mechanism. One need only contrive the proper timing. Holmes tested the lever with delicate precision, and I heard the soft click that Miss Drake had described, a sound that would carry through the stage floorboards but remain inaudible to those in the auditorium. More telling still was his discovery of a pin-prick aperture bored neatly between the stage boards above, too small to admit the blade of the theatrical dagger, yet perfectly sized for a thin stream of blood to be forced upward through the mechanism. "The blood evidence on the stage now assumes its proper significance," Holmes explained, his voice carrying that note of satisfaction I had learned to recognize. "The varied coagulation rates you observed, Watson, resulted from blood being introduced at different moments, some from this mechanical reservoir and some from the victim himself." Davies, who had been hovering nervously at a distance, approached with forced joviality. "Mr. Holmes, I trust your examination is proving productive. This basement can be treacherous for those unfamiliar with its layout." Holmes straightened from his investigation, his grey eyes fixed upon the stage manager with renewed interest. "Mr. Davies, you are precisely the man I wished to see. This sophisticated apparatus, surely such modifications require your authorization and oversight." "Indeed, sir. We have been upgrading several of our trap mechanisms to improve their reliability. This particular installation was supervised by Mr. Cornelius Blackwood, our juvenile lead, who volunteered his mechanical expertise to reduce expenses." Holmes and I exchanged meaningful glances at this revelation. Blackwood, whom Miss Drake had mentioned as harbouring resentment toward Lemaire, had been responsible for installing a mechanism that terminated precisely where the victim had fallen. Holmes knelt once more beside the apparatus, his attention focused upon additional evidence that his keen eyes had detected. "A gentleman's boot print in the dust here, Watson," he observed, carefully measuring the impression. "Narrow and fashionably high, with an angular nick at the outer edge. Not the hobnailed boot of a stage hand, nor the practical footwear of a carpenter, but the refined shoe, of one who aspires to genteel appearance. Holmes produced his pocket knife and carefully extracted a minute fragment from between two floorboards, a tiny splinter of freshly cut oak stained with dark varnish and quite unlike the aged pine of the original construction. He sealed this evidence in a small envelope along with a microscopic thread of crimson silk he had discovered caught upon the lever mechanism. The killer's ingenuity lies in their understanding of both human psychology and theatrical engineering, Holmes explained as we prepared to ascend from this mechanical underworld. They have created an illusion so perfect that the murder weapon appears to be harmless, while the true instrument of death operates invisibly from below. As we emerged onto the stage level, a slim figure approached from the shadows of the wings, Miss Eleanor Vance, the chorus girl whose distress Mr. Harcourt had been comforting earlier. Her hands twisted upon one another, and her pale cheeks bore the flush of sleepless grief. "Mr. Holmes," she faltered, "I did not dare speak before the others, but you must know Mr. Lemaire dismissed me from his presence at luncheon today, saying he had urgent correspondence to complete. When he emerged from his locked dressing room, he was white as paper, and he spoke of having signed his absolution. He laughed when I begged him to explain, but it was the laughter of a man in despair." Holmes's eyes brightened with unmistakable interest. "Absolution," he repeated, as though testing the weight of the word. "Miss Vance, you have provided a crucial piece of our puzzle. This letter, did you observe its direction or any other details of its composition?" "Only that his hands trembled as he sealed it, and that he spoke of old debts finally coming due. I thought it merely another of his theatrical moods, but now—" Her voice broke with the weight of realization. "You have done well to tell me," Holmes assured her with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Go home and rest. Tomorrow will bring revelations that may prove shocking to all who knew Mr. Lemaire." As Miss Vance departed into the fog-shrouded night, Holmes turned to me with that expression of growing comprehension I had witnessed countless times before. "Watson, we are dealing with a crime of remarkable sophistication, one that transforms the very foundations of theatrical illusion into instruments of death. The killer has understood that the most perfect murder is one that appears impossible, for impossibility breeds confusion, and confusion obscures truth." The mechanical precision of the crime was becoming clear, though the human motivations that had set such elaborate machinery in motion remained shrouded in the same obscurity that enveloped the London streets beyond the theatre's walls. Yet I sensed that Holmes was drawing ever nearer to the solution of this most perplexing mystery, where knives that could not cut had somehow learned to kill with deadly efficiency. Holmes's mind seized upon Miss Vance's revelation with the intensity of a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. The word absolution hung in the fog-laden air between us, carrying implications that extended far beyond the immediate tragedy. Without hesitation, he turned to Mr. Harcourt with the decisive authority that brooked no opposition. "The late Mr. Lemaire's dressing-room must be examined immediately," Holmes declared, his grey eyes already calculating the possibilities that this new intelligence presented. "A man who speaks of signing his absolution and old debts coming due is rarely the victim of sudden passion. He is a man who anticipates his reckoning." Harcourt produced the necessary keys with trembling fingers, leading us through the theatre's narrow corridors to a cramped chamber that bore all the intimate disorder of an actor's professional life. Grease paint sticks lay scattered across the small table, alongside a silver-backed brush and a bouquet of violets already beginning to wilt in their vase. Holmes moved through this personal space with the systematic precision of a surgeon, his trained eye cataloguing each detail that might illuminate the victim's final hours. The writing desk drew his immediate attention, its surface bearing the detritus of recent correspondence. A fountain pen with violet ink still wet upon its nib, a stick of red sealing wax, and most significantly, a blotter marked with the impressions of hasty writing. Holmes lifted this seemingly insignificant piece of equipment to the gaslight, then laid a fresh sheet of paper upon its surface and passed his pencil across it with practiced dexterity. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, as ghostly words emerged in reverse upon the paper. "The impressions reveal fragments of our victim's final communication. If I die before the week is out, my debt to GR is discharged. Manchester, no more letters, no more stage door visits." The signature appears to be simply S, though whether this represents Sybil, as might be assumed, or some other correspondence entirely, remains to be determined. Holmes examined the fireplace grate with equal attention, using the poker to extract 2 brittle fragments of ash and a corner of paper that had escaped complete combustion. The surviving edge showed only the lower portions of letters and what appeared to be the flourished tail of a capital R. He placed these remnants carefully in his pocketbook, treating them with the reverence of archaeological treasures. "The pattern emerges, Watson," Holmes continued, his voice carrying that note of satisfaction I had learned to recognize. Lemaire was not merely the victim of theatrical jealousy or romantic passion. He was a man settling accounts, both literal and metaphorical. The letter, Miss Vance observed, was likely his final attempt to resolve obligations that had followed him from his previous engagements. The sound of hurried footsteps in the corridor interrupted his analysis, and Inspector Lestrade appeared in the doorway, his thin face flushed with a mixture of agitation and self-satisfaction. "Holmes, I've just received confirmation from Scotland Yard regarding Miss Drake's background. There are irregularities in her past that support the charges against her." Holmes regarded the inspector with the patience one might reserve for an enthusiastic but misguided student. "Lestrade, I fear your investigation, while thorough in its own fashion, may be pursuing shadows while the substance escapes notice. The evidence we have discovered suggests motivations far more complex than a lover's quarrel." "Nevertheless," Lestrade replied with stubborn conviction, "the physical evidence remains overwhelming. The woman struck the fatal blow regardless of whatever mechanical contraptions you may have discovered." Holmes rose from his examination of the dressing room, his expression carrying that particular intensity that indicated his theories were crystallizing into certainty. "The mechanical contraption, as you so dismissively term it, is the very heart of this mystery. The blow Miss Drake struck was indeed fatal, but not in the manner you suppose. The true genius of this crime lies in its transformation of theatrical illusion into murderous reality." He moved toward the door with sudden decision, his mind clearly racing ahead to the next phase of investigation. "Watson, your services are required for a different aspect of this inquiry. The Manchester connection demands immediate attention. You must travel there tonight and investigate Lemaire's previous engagement with particular attention to financial obligations and personal entanglements. The names GR and any associates who might harbour sufficient grievance to pursue him to London." I nodded, understanding the logic of dividing our investigative efforts. Holmes's systematic approach to complex cases often required simultaneous pursuit of multiple lines of inquiry, and the Manchester connection promised to illuminate motivations that the London evidence alone could not reveal. "While you uncover the human elements of this tragedy," Holmes continued, "I shall remain here to complete my examination of the mechanical aspects. The apparatus beneath the stage represents only one component of an elaborate scheme. The true perpetrator has demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in combining theatrical knowledge with engineering skill, and I suspect there are additional elements to this deception that have yet to reveal themselves. As we prepared to separate on our respective missions, Holmes paused to examine once more the fragments he had recovered from the fireplace. "Remember, Watson, that the most dangerous deceptions are those that contain sufficient truth to mislead even careful observers. Our killer has not merely committed murder, but has created a masterpiece of misdirection that uses the victim's own past to obscure the true nature of the crime." The fog seemed to press more closely about the theatre as we prepared to depart, but I sensed that Holmes was drawing steadily nearer to the solution of this most perplexing mystery. The mechanical ingenuity of the murder method was becoming clear, yet the human motivations that had set such elaborate machinery in motion remained shrouded in the same obscurity that enveloped London's ancient streets. The case of the knife that never cut was revealing itself to be a crime of remarkable sophistication, where the very foundations of theatrical illusion had been transformed into instruments of death. The night express carried me northward through the industrial heartland, where furnace fires pierced the darkness like malevolent eyes watching my passage toward Manchester. Holmes's parting words echoed in the rhythmic clatter of wheels upon rails. "Observe the characters as closely as the facts," and I settled into contemplation of the mysterious G.R., whose initials had appeared in Lemaire's final correspondence. The victim's references to old debts and absolution suggested a past that had pursued him with relentless determination to his death upon the Imperial Theatre's stage. Manchester's grimy dawn revealed a city transformed by industrial ambition, where elegant theatrical districts stood in stark contrast to the soot-blackened tenements of the working classes. The Grand Opera House occupied a position of architectural distinction on King Street, its ornate facade bearing the accumulated patina of coal smoke, yet retaining unmistakable grandeur. Within, I found Mr. Gilbert Ransom, the theatre's manager, a compact man with iron-grey whiskers whose shrewd eyes measured me the instant I presented Holmes's credentials. "Edwin Lemaire," Ransom repeated with a mixture of professional admiration and personal exasperation. A performer of undeniable talent whose personal conduct created difficulties that ultimately necessitated his departure. "You inquire about debts, Dr. Watson, and indeed there were substantial obligations that remained unsettled when he fled to London." Ransom produced a leather-bound ledger that chronicled the complex financial arrangements of Lemaire's engagement. The entries revealed a pattern of advances against future earnings, loans secured against anticipated receipts, and ultimately a debt of £180 that had grown increasingly burdensome. Yet the most significant revelation came when Ransom displayed a Bank of England draft that had arrived only the previous week. The full amount, paid in violet ink with a flourish that matched the signature G.R., Ransom explained, indicating the document with evident relief. An anonymous settlement that closed Lemaire's account honourably, though the identity of his benefactor remained mysterious. The messenger wore gentleman's gloves and spoke only the necessary civilities. The initials from Lemaire's blotter thus acquired concrete meaning, yet the mystery deepened rather than resolved. Who possessed both the resources and motivation to discharge such a substantial debt on behalf of a fugitive actor? Ransom's next revelation provided crucial insight into the human complexities that had driven Lemaire from Manchester. His difficulties extended beyond mere financial obligations. The manager continued with obvious reluctance. Lemaire had become entangled with Mrs. Georgina Radcliffe, whose husband's textile fortune provided substantial backing for our theatre. The lady conceived a romantic attachment that Lemaire initially encouraged, then rejected when her husband threatened to withdraw his support entirely. The pattern that emerged was one of escalating desperation, where romantic indiscretion had compounded financial impropriety until Lemaire's position became untenable. Mrs. Radcliffe, Ransom revealed, was a woman of passionate temperament whose wounded pride had transformed initial infatuation into something far more dangerous. Her subsequent correspondence, which Ransom reluctantly shared, revealed explicit threats and a determination to pursue her quarry regardless of consequences. She made several visits after Lemaire's departure, Ransom admitted, inquiring about his whereabouts and offering increasingly desperate sums for information regarding his London engagement. Her questions were remarkably specific. She inquired about stage machinery, trap mechanisms, and the technical qualifications of theatre personnel. I assumed she was conducting legitimate business research. The most crucial revelation came when Ransom mentioned Mrs. Radcliffe's travelling companion during her London journey. Her nephew, Mr. Cornelius Blackwood, a young man whose theatrical ambitions were matched by considerable mechanical aptitude. I recognized the name immediately from our Imperial Theatre investigation and pressed Ransom for additional details regarding Blackwood's technical expertise. A promising actor with restless energy and pronounced opinions, Ransom explained. He possessed remarkable skill with stage machinery and had supervised several complex installations during his tenure here. We experienced an unfortunate accident during our production of Julius Caesar. A trap mechanism misfired, injuring one of our scene shifters. Blackwood produced elaborate plans and protested his innocence with more vehemence than the situation seemed to warrant. I sought out the theatre's master carpenter, Mr. Hadley, whose weathered hands and practical demeanor spoke of decades spent crafting theatrical illusions. At mention of Blackwood, his expression grew thoughtful. "Ingenious lad with tools," he acknowledged. "Built a remarkable contraption for our Macbeth production, blood rising from the stage boards when the tyrant fell. A bladder, a lever, and a pinhole so fine you'd need a magnifying glass to detect it. The effect was so realistic it nearly caused fainting fits in the gallery." The description matched Holmes's discovery beneath the Imperial Theatre with such precision that I felt the case advancing rapidly toward resolution. Before departing Manchester, I visited Hartwell and Sons, the theatrical suppliers whose reputation extended throughout the north. A clerk recalled a recent inquiry from a London gentleman regarding Renaissance stilettos with garneted hilts. "Left his card, he did," the clerk explained, producing the evidence. Mr. Cornelius Blackwood, actor, particular about the blade length and handle decoration, I noted his boots, narrow and fashionably high, with a distinctive nick on the outer edge. As I prepared for my return journey, a telegraph boy found me with an urgent message from Baker Street. Holmes's laconic phrasing, "Danger imminent, return by first train, verify Blackwood's plans and Cartwright's injury," conveyed sufficient urgency to send me hastening toward the station. The southbound express carried me through familiar industrial landscapes, but now the darkness held different meanings as the pattern of conspiracy revealed itself with crystalline clarity. Mrs. Georgina Radcliffe's wounded passion had found its instrument in her nephew's technical expertise and professional jealousy, creating a partnership capable of transforming theatrical illusion into deadly reality. The debt that had been mysteriously paid represented not generosity, but the final preparation for an elaborate revenge that would satisfy both personal betrayal and professional ambition. Blackwood possessed the mechanical skills, intimate knowledge of theatre operations, and access to the Imperial Theatre necessary to execute such a sophisticated murder scheme. The case of the knife that never cut was revealing itself to be a masterpiece of collaborative deception, where the victim's own past had been weaponized against him through the combined forces of wounded love, financial desperation, and theatrical expertise. As London's smoky environs appeared beyond the carriage windows, I found myself eager to share these discoveries with Holmes, knowing that his mechanical insights combined with my investigation of human motivations would finally illuminate the complete scope of this remarkable crime. The grey dawn was yielding to pale winter sunlight as my hansom deposited me at Baker Street, where I found Holmes pacing before our sitting-room window with the restless energy that invariably preceded his most decisive actions. He turned at my entrance with eyes that blazed with the intensity of discovery, and I knew immediately that the hours of my absence had brought revelations of the utmost significance. "Watson," he declared without preamble, "your timing proves providential. The Manchester connection has borne fruit beyond our most optimistic expectations, while developments here in London have transformed our understanding of this conspiracy from mere murder to something approaching systematic destruction." I settled into my familiar chair and spread the fruits of my northern investigation before him. The details of Mrs. Georgina Radcliffe's wounded passion, the mysterious debt payment in violet ink, Blackwood's mechanical expertise demonstrated in Manchester's Macbeth, production and the stiletto purchase that connected our theatrical killer to the missing weapon. Holmes absorbed these revelations with the systematic precision of a calculating engine, his long fingers steepled as the pattern achieved its final clarity. The initials G.R. upon Lemaire's blotter thus resolve themselves, Holmes observed with satisfaction. Not Gilbert Ransom, as superficial analysis might suggest, but Georgina Radcliffe herself. She discharged the Manchester debt not from generosity, but to clear the stage for a far more personal reckoning. Her nephew provided the mechanical genius to transform wounded pride into lethal reality. Holmes moved to our mantelpiece, where he had arranged a collection of evidence that immediately commanded my attention. A gentleman's boot, narrow and fashionably high, bore the distinctive angular nick I had observed in the theatre's basement dust. Beside it lay fragments of correspondence in violet ink, architectural drawings of remarkable precision, and most significantly, a Renaissance stiletto whose garneted hilt caught the morning light with ominous beauty. Blackwood's lodgings yielded these treasures after his precipitous departure at 3 this morning, Holmes explained. His landlady observed him leaving in the company of a veiled lady whose carriage bore Manchester textile insignia. Before his flight, he attempted to destroy considerable documentation, though these fragments escaped the flames. I examined the charred papers, recognizing immediately the technical sophistication of the plans and the meticulous calculations that accompanied them. The drawings revealed not merely the blood-dispensing mechanism we had discovered, but comprehensive knowledge of the Imperial Theatre's structural vulnerabilities that suggested preparation for far more ambitious schemes than a single assassination. The missing stiletto has been recovered and cleaned, though microscopic blood traces confirm its role in Lemaire's death, Holmes continued. More disturbing are these detailed observations of the entire theatre company, months of systematic surveillance documenting personal habits, financial vulnerabilities, and romantic entanglements. Blackwood's preparation extended far beyond the elimination of his immediate rival. Holmes's expression grew grave as he produced a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be architectural modifications planned for multiple trap mechanisms throughout the theatre. "Watson, we are confronting a mind of remarkable patience and systematic malice. The murder of Lemaire was merely the opening movement of a more elaborate composition designed to satisfy both personal revenge and professional advancement through the methodical destruction of perceived competitors." The implications sent a chill through my understanding of the case. What had appeared to be a crime of passion was revealing itself as the calculated opening gambit of a campaign that threatened the entire Imperial Theatre Company. Yet Holmes's next revelation proved even more disturbing. "Come, Watson, before we can prevent tonight's catastrophe, we must examine the victim himself. The theatre physician's cursory examination missed crucial evidence that will illuminate the precise method of this impossible murder." Within the hour, we stood in the cold white light of St. Bartholomew's mortuary, where the drawer bearing Edwin Lemaire's remains slid silently into view. Holmes deferred to my medical expertise with the gravity he reserved for crucial evidence, and I began my systematic examination with the thoroughness that such circumstances demanded. The artificial blood that had created such dramatic effect upon the stage had crusted into the fabric of Lemaire's shirt, but the skin beneath the torn linen remained entirely unbroken across the chest. It was only when Holmes directed my attention to the hollow beneath the left arm that the true nature of the wound revealed itself. A minute puncture no broader than a fine needle's eye, positioned with surgical precision to penetrate between the ribs toward the pericardium. A stiletto wound, I confirmed quietly, slender, keen, and driven upward with anatomical knowledge. Internal hemorrhage would follow such a puncture within moments, yet the entry point was concealed by the victim's costume and the natural fold of flesh beneath the arm. Driven not by Miss Drake's theatrical blow, Holmes observed with grim satisfaction, but from below, at the precise instant when every eye was fixed upon the harmless dagger above. The tremor she felt was the whisper of the signal mechanism. The click was the release of the hidden blade. The blood upon the boards was pure theatre, while the death was accomplished through mechanical precision. As we emerged from the mortuary into London's grey morning, a uniformed messenger approached with the breathless urgency reserved for official catastrophes. "Inspector Lestrade's compliments, Mr. Holmes. You are wanted immediately at the Imperial Theatre. There has been an accident in the machinery rooms." Holmes's eyes hardened with immediate comprehension. "Not an accident, Watson, a correction. Our quarry has returned to destroy the evidence of his ingenuity." The scene that greeted us beneath the Imperial Theatre's stage confirmed Holmes's darkest suspicions. The ingenious mechanism we had discovered lay in complete ruins. Lever shattered, rubber bladder burst, the connecting tubes severed at multiple points with surgical precision. Inspector Lestrade met us with obvious frustration, explaining that the gasman Milligan had been found unconscious, overcome by coal gas from a deliberately opened valve. Holmes examined the destruction with the methodical attention he brought to all crime scenes, noting the tool marks upon broken timber, the scratches where instruments had been hastily applied, and, most significantly, a minute chip of red stone that glinted among the debris. "Garnet," he announced, holding the fragment to the light. Freshly struck from our missing stiletto's hilt, Blackwood returned to recover his weapon and eliminate the evidence of his mechanical genius. Milligan's condition suggests he interrupted this destruction and paid the price for his curiosity. The footprint Holmes had measured the previous evening remained partially visible despite the constable's interference, confirming the narrow instep and distinctive nick that connected our suspect to both crime scenes. More damning still was the fragment of crimson silk caught upon the broken lever mechanism, the signal line that had connected Miss Drake's theatrical blow to the deadly reality beneath the stage. "The killer's arrogance has provided us with opportunity," Holmes declared, as we prepared to leave the scene of destruction. "Tonight's performance of The Vengeance of Verona will proceed as scheduled, with Blackwood himself assuming the role of his murdered rival. Mrs. Radcliffe has requested a private box, no doubt, to witness the culmination of their elaborate revenge." Holmes's grey eyes blazed with the cold fire I had learned to associate with his most dangerous moods. They believed themselves beyond detection, having destroyed the mechanical evidence and eliminated potential witnesses. "Tonight, Watson, we shall demonstrate that the greatest illusions are those that reveal truth rather than conceal it. The Imperial Theatre shall witness a performance that neither Blackwood nor his vengeful patroness will ever forget." The case of the knife that never cut was approaching its climactic resolution, where elaborate deceptions would finally yield to the inexorable logic of justice. Yet I sensed that the evening's revelations would prove more shocking than even Holmes's remarkable deductions had prepared us to anticipate. The afternoon hours before the evening performance found Holmes in a state of methodical preparation that reminded me of a surgeon arranging instruments before a delicate operation. He had commandeered our sitting-room table for the construction of an ingenious apparatus, a compressed air system connected to a bladder filled with theatrical blood designed to create the dramatic effects that would convince our quarry their plan was proceeding flawlessly while simultaneously exposing their guilt through scientific precision. "Watson," Holmes explained as he tested the mechanism's reliability, "tonight's performance requires modifications that our theatrical conspirators cannot possibly anticipate. The psychology of revenge demands public vindication, and we shall provide exactly that, though not in the manner they expect." His first stratagem involved the preparation of a forged communication written in the violet ink we had recovered from Lemaire's dressing room. Holmes's hand, capable of mimicking any script when necessity demanded, produced a note whose phrasing matched the fragments we had discovered in Blackwood's charred correspondence. "Final arrangements confirmed. Signal from box as planned. Trust the mechanism. Gr." He sealed it with the same red wax from Lemaire's desk, then dispatched it to Blackwood's lodgings through a messenger whose discretion had been secured with both coin and careful instruction. The second element of his trap proved even more ingenious. Holmes had procured a quantity of aniline dye, a recent innovation in chemical science that would prove invisible under normal gaslight, but would fluoresce with unmistakable brilliance when exposed to the intense illumination of a calcium light. This powder he applied with meticulous care to the reconstructed lever mechanism beneath the stage, creating an invisible snare that would mark any hand that touched it with evidence as permanent as a brand. As evening approached and the Imperial Theatre filled with its customary audience, Holmes positioned Inspector Lestrade and his constables at strategic points throughout the building. The basement trap mechanisms were monitored, the stage wings secured, and, most crucially, the corridor leading to Mrs. Radcliffe's private box was discreetly observed by plainclothes officers whose presence would remain undetected until the moment of revelation. Mrs. Georgina Radcliffe arrived precisely at curtain time, her bearing that of a woman attending her moment of triumph. She occupied her private box with regal composure, her opera glasses trained upon the stage with unwavering attention. Even at our distance, her satisfaction was palpable, the contentment of one witnessing the successful conclusion of an elaborate campaign of revenge. Cornelius Blackwood commanded the stage with the confident bearing of one who believed himself beyond detection, yet I observed in his performance a tension that derived not from artistic interpretation, but from anticipation of the evening's larger significance. He moved through the early scenes with professional competence, while his gaze periodically drifted toward Mrs. Radcliffe's box, seeking the approval of his vengeful patroness. The fatal scene approached with inexorable momentum, each line of dialogue carrying additional weight for those who understood the mechanical precision that had previously transformed similar words into instruments of death. Miss Sybil Drake, fitted beneath her costume with a light steel cuirass that Holmes had procured from a theatrical armourer, moved through her performance with admirable composure despite the traumatic associations the role inevitably carried. Holmes had positioned himself in the wings disguised as a stagehand, his keen eyes monitoring both the action above and the mechanical apparatus below. At the precise moment when Miss Drake struck her theatrical blow with the harmless retractable dagger, Holmes activated his concealed compressed air system, sending a dramatic spray of artificial blood across the stage boards while simultaneously triggering a calcium light that would reveal the fluorescent properties of his aniline trap. The effect proved more revealing than even Holmes had anticipated. Blackwood, believing the genuine murder mechanism had functioned as planned, allowed his gaze to drift toward Mrs. Radcliffe's box in search of her approving recognition. Yet instead of the satisfied smile he expected, her expression registered first confusion, then growing alarm as she realized that the evening's events were not proceeding according to their carefully orchestrated plan. The crucial moment arrived when Holmes, from his position in the wings, directed the calcium light toward the basement mechanism. The brilliant illumination revealed Blackwood's handprints glowing with unmistakable violet fluorescence upon the lever he had operated during the original murder, evidence as damning as any confession. The aniline dye, invisible under normal gaslight, blazed like fire under the intense illumination, marking his guilt with scientific precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holmes announced, stepping onto the stage with the measured authority that commanded immediate attention, "you have witnessed this evening not merely a performance of The Vengeance of Verona, but the final act of a drama that began with ingenious murder and concludes with the exposure of remarkable criminal deception." Blackwood's theatrical composure cracked entirely as he stared at his fluorescent-stained hands, the physical evidence of his guilt blazing under the calcium light like accusations written in fire. His eyes found Mrs. Radcliffe's box with the desperate appeal of one seeking rescue from an impossible situation, yet her own expression had transformed from triumph to horror as she grasped the implications of their exposure. Inspector Lestrade emerged from the wings with his constables, their coordinated movements suggesting the careful preparation that had preceded this moment. Mrs. Radcliffe rose from her seat with sudden decision, clearly intending to depart before the evening's revelations could implicate her further, yet found her path blocked by the plain-clothes officers Holmes had positioned throughout the theatre. "The knife that never cut has finally revealed its secrets," Holmes declared, his voice carrying clearly throughout the hushed auditorium. "Mr. Blackwood, your mechanical ingenuity was remarkable, but your understanding of chemical science proved insufficient. The aniline dye that marks your hands connects you irrefutably to the apparatus that murdered Edwin Lemaire, while the violet ink of your correspondence establishes the conspiracy that motivated such elaborate revenge." Blackwood stood motionless upon the stage for several moments, his stained hands extended before him like evidence of some ancient curse. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the hollow resignation of one whose elaborate deceptions had finally collapsed beneath the weight of scientific truth. "Then the performance ends," he said quietly, allowing Lestrade's constables to approach without resistance. "Though I maintain that Lemaire deserved his fate and that my artistry surpassed his in every particular. The case of the knife that never cut had reached its conclusion through the marriage of theatrical illusion and scientific precision, revealing that the most dangerous deceptions are indeed those that appear impossible until the moment when truth illuminates their hidden mechanisms with inescapable clarity." The curtain descended upon a house struck into profound silence, yet the drama's true climax was only beginning to unfold. Inspector Lestrade moved with practiced efficiency, his constables closing about both Blackwood upon the stage and Mrs. Radcliffe in her private box with the coordinated precision that Holmes's careful preparation had made possible. The aniline dye continued to fluoresce upon Blackwood's hands under the calcium light's brilliant illumination, providing evidence as damning as any written confession. Holmes descended from the stage with measured steps, his grey eyes surveying the assembled theatre company with the satisfaction of one whose methodical investigation had finally yielded complete understanding. Mr. Harcourt approached with obvious relief, his face bearing the expression of a man whose professional reputation had been preserved through the exposure of truth rather than destroyed by false accusations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holmes announced, his voice carrying clearly throughout the hushed auditorium, You have witnessed this evening not merely the resolution of an impossible crime, but a demonstration of how the most ingenious deceptions must ultimately yield to systematic investigation. The knife that never cut has revealed its secrets through the marriage of mechanical precision and criminal psychology. Mrs. Radcliffe, her regal composure finally cracking under the weight of exposure, drew herself up with defiant pride, even as Lestrade's officers flanked her position. "Mr. Holmes," she declared with icy dignity, "you have demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in exposing what you term criminal conspiracy. Yet I maintain that justice has been served upon one who richly deserved his fate." Holmes regarded her with something approaching sympathy, recognizing in her desperate passion the human frailty that transforms wounded love into murderous hatred. "Mrs. Radcliffe, your nephew's mechanical genius served your desire for revenge with remarkable precision, yet the law recognizes no distinction between justified and unjustified homicide when accomplished through such elaborate deception." Blackwood, still standing upon the stage where he had hoped to achieve professional triumph through his rival's elimination, addressed the assembly with perverse theatrical pride. "The mechanism was my masterpiece," he declared, his voice carrying the projection he had employed in countless performances. "A marriage of theatrical illusion and mechanical precision that transformed harmless performance into lethal reality." Holmes moved to the reconstructed apparatus he had prepared for the evening's demonstration, using it to illustrate the crime's true complexity. The missing stiletto from Mr. Pugh's collection was positioned beneath the stage with surgical precision, mounted upon a spring-loaded slider that could rise precisely 2 inches when activated. The blade's angle was calculated to penetrate beneath Mr. Lemaire's left arm at the moment when his theatrical blocking placed him in the predetermined position. He indicated the pinhole aperture between the stage boards, barely visible even under the intense illumination. The timing was controlled through an ingenious signal system. A crimson silk thread, nearly invisible against Miss Drake's costume, connected the harmless theatrical dagger to the lethal mechanism below. When she struck her theatrical blow, the thread transmitted the signal through this aperture, releasing the concealed blade at precisely the moment when every eye was fixed upon the harmless performance above. Miss Drake, still wearing her stage costume but now freed from the nightmare of false accusation, wept with relief as the full scope of her innocence became clear. The theatre company watched with fascination as Holmes demonstrated how their familiar stage had been transformed into an instrument of murder through mechanical ingenuity and criminal determination. "The blood evidence that so mystified our initial investigation," Holmes continued, "resulted from your dual system, Mr. Blackwood. The India rubber bladder filled with slaughterhouse blood created the dramatic spray that stained Mr. Lemaire's shirt at the moment of Miss Drake's harmless blow, while the victim's actual blood flowed from the concealed wound beneath his arm. The varying coagulation rates that Dr. Watson observed provided the crucial clue that led to the discovery of your apparatus." Holmes produced the fragments of evidence he had methodically collected, the garnet chip that matched the stiletto's damaged hilt, the boot print that corresponded to Blackwood's distinctive footwear, the architectural drawings that revealed months of careful planning, and the correspondence in violet ink that connected the conspiracy across multiple cities. Your Manchester background provided both the technical expertise and the personal motivation necessary for such an elaborate crime, Holmes explained, his keen gaze fixed upon the conspirators. Mrs. Radcliffe's wounded pride, combined with your professional jealousy, created a partnership capable of transforming theatrical illusion into deadly reality. The debt discharged in Manchester was merely the final preparation for a revenge that demanded not merely death, but the complete destruction of reputation through apparent impossibility. The gasman Milligan recovered sufficiently from his coal gas exposure to provide testimony confirmed Blackwood's attempt to destroy the mechanical evidence. His account revealed the systematic nature of the conspiracy's final phase, where the elimination of physical proof had been planned with the same precision that characterized the original murder. As Lestrade prepared the formal charges, Mrs. Radcliffe's composure finally collapsed entirely. "He promised me that Edwin would suffer as I had suffered," she whispered, her voice carrying the hollow desperation of one whose elaborate schemes had crumbled into ruin. The humiliation, the financial destruction, the social disgrace, all would be repaid through his public exposure and ultimate destruction. Holmes nodded with understanding, though his expression remained grave. "Your nephew's mechanical genius provided the means, Mrs. Radcliffe, but the motivation remained yours throughout. The case demonstrates how wounded passion, when combined with technical expertise and patient planning, can create crimes that challenge every assumption about the nature of murder itself." Blackwood offered no resistance as the constables prepared to escort him from the theatre, yet his eyes retained the cold calculation that had characterized his entire approach to the crime. "The timing was perfect," he murmured, with professional pride, even in defeat. "A finger's breadth wrong and the mechanism fails. My calculations, my engineering, my artistry surpassed his in every particular." As the evening's revelations concluded and the theatre began to empty of its stunned audience, Holmes and I found ourselves alone upon the stage where such elaborate deceptions had finally yielded to scientific investigation. The calcium light still cast its brilliant illumination upon the boards where artificial blood had created dramatic effect while concealing genuine murder. "Watson," Holmes remarked with quiet satisfaction, "we have witnessed this evening the triumph of methodical investigation over elaborate criminal deception. The most ingenious crimes are indeed those that appear impossible, yet impossibility itself becomes the key to their solution when approached with proper scientific rigor." The case of the knife that never cut had reached its conclusion through the patient accumulation of evidence and the systematic application of logical deduction. Justice had been served not through dramatic revelation alone, but through the inexorable logic of facts properly interpreted and criminal psychology thoroughly understood. The theatre's ancient boards had witnessed many performances, but none more significant than this final demonstration that truth, however cunningly concealed, must ultimately yield to the persistent application of reason and scientific method. The days following brought the inevitable machinery of justice grinding into motion, though not without the peculiar ironies that mark our curious metropolis. The newspapers, with their characteristic blend of sensation and skepticism, proclaimed the unmasking of the theatre conspiracy in headlines that alternated between the lurid and the laudatory. Inspector Lestrade, who had conducted himself creditably during the crisis, accepted official commendation with his customary mixture of pride and bewilderment, though he was careful to inform his superiors that Mr. Sherlock Holmes had provided assistance of an unusual and highly technical nature. Miss Sybil Drake's reputation, so carelessly besmirched by hasty accusation, emerged not merely restored but enhanced by her dignified conduct throughout the ordeal. Mr. Harcourt's Imperial Theatre, which had teetered on the brink of ruin when the case began, now found its box office besieged by patrons eager to claim they had witnessed the very stage where theatrical illusion had concealed genuine murder. It remains one of London's persistent ironies that tragedy should prove the surest benefactor of dramatic art. The fog had finally lifted by the time Holmes and I returned to Baker Street in the early morning hours, leaving the ancient thoroughfares gleaming wetly under the gaslight like a city washed clean of deception. Mrs. Hudson had maintained our fire despite the lateness of the hour, and Holmes settled into his familiar chair with the profound satisfaction of one whose intellectual faculties had been tested to their utmost and emerged triumphant. "Watson," he remarked, reaching for his violin with characteristic languid grace, "we have witnessed a conspiracy remarkable not merely for its mechanical ingenuity, but for its demonstration of how human passion, when disciplined by patient intelligence and unlimited resources, can create crimes that challenge every assumption about the nature of murder itself." He drew melancholy notes from the instrument as I poured brandy for both of us, noting how the events of recent days had etched themselves upon my friend's austere features. Upon the mantelpiece, he had arranged the seemingly insignificant objects that to any eye but his would have appeared mere workshop sweepings: a fleck of dried clay, a thread of crimson silk, a splinter of varnished oak, and the tiny garnet chip struck from the stolen stiletto's hilt. "You see, Watson," Holmes continued, indicating each piece of evidence in turn, "our adversaries possessed admirable qualities that nearly ensured their success. Their knowledge of theatrical machinery was complete, their patience exemplary, their understanding of human psychology sophisticated. Yet they possessed one fatal weakness. Revenge demands an audience. The very desire to witness their triumph forced them to leave traces that no mechanic, and certainly no wounded lover, can altogether efface." He lifted the clay fragment with his long fingers. "Pugging from between the new joists, fresh, fine, and still bearing the impression of a brass screw-head. This silk thread, dyed precisely to match Miss Drake's costume, served as the signal line that transformed her harmless theatrical stroke into the deadly mechanism below. The varnished oak splinter came not from the Imperial's aged pine construction, but from Blackwood's privately constructed slider. And the garnet, Watson, the garnet was confession itself. A man may destroy drawings, burn correspondence, even shatter his apparatus, but he cannot prevent a jewel from bearing witness to his haste." Holmes set aside his violin and moved to contemplate the dying fire. The true genius of their scheme lay not merely in mechanical sophistication, but in their understanding of theatrical perception itself. They recognized that an audience, and indeed an entire company, would be so utterly convinced of the dagger's harmlessness that any evidence pointing to it as the murder weapon would be dismissed as impossible. This certainty in the impossible created perfect concealment for the true instrument of death. I found myself reflecting upon the human cost of such elaborate revenge: lives destroyed, careers threatened, an entire theatre company traumatized by events that originated in wounded pride and professional jealousy. The collaborative nature of the conspiracy, I observed, required both Mrs. Radcliffe's passionate motivation and her nephew's mechanical expertise. Neither could have accomplished such a crime alone. "Precisely, Watson. The psychological element proves equally instructive. Mrs. Radcliffe's transformation from wounded lover to systematic avenger demonstrates how personal betrayal, when combined with sufficient resources and patient planning, can create crimes of remarkable sophistication. Her nephew provided the technical means, but the emotional drive remained entirely her own throughout." A knock interrupted our reflections, and Mr. Harcourt entered, his lined face now illuminated by honest gratitude that became him far better than theatrical self-possession. He pressed upon Holmes a letter of thanks signed by the entire company, and more practically a substantial cheque drawn upon his bank. Holmes glanced at the sum, smiled his thin smile, and returned it with a slight inclination of his head. "Mr. Harcourt, you will oblige me by dividing that amount among your stage hands, particularly the gasman Milligan, whose lungs have served your art quite as faithfully as any leading man's voice." The Imperial will show its audience something better than sensation if it demonstrates that loyalty is remembered and rewarded. Harcourt's eyes moistened with genuine emotion. "You have given me back my theatre, Mr. Holmes." "Not I," Holmes replied with characteristic deflection. "You and your honest workmen accomplished that. I merely removed a parasite from the machinery." After our visitor departed, Holmes reached for his pipe and settled into contemplative silence. The familiar scent of shag tobacco filled our sitting room as he reflected upon the case's broader implications. "Come, Watson," he said at length, "let us place this matter in its proper philosophical frame. We began with an apparent impossibility, a knife that could not cut, yet somehow inflicted mortal wounds. We discovered that impossibility is most often an advertisement posted by rogues who trade upon the public's appetite for marvels. The most dangerous deceptions are indeed those that masquerade as supernatural phenomena while operating through entirely mechanical means." He drew thoughtfully upon his pipe. Mechanism, motive, opportunity. Each element demanded systematic testing and reconciliation with the others. Our murderers counted upon awe, confusion, and investigative haste. We repaid them with patience, observation, and scientific method. The varied coagulation of blood evidence, the boot print in basement dust, the tremor Miss Drake felt through the dagger's handle, each was a letter in the alphabet of truth, waiting only for proper interpretation. As dawn approached and our fire settled into glowing embers, Holmes made his final observation on the case. "This affair stands as testament to the principle that no crime, however ingeniously conceived, can withstand systematic investigation guided by proper scientific methodology. Truth will emerge, though it may require patience, careful observation, and the willingness to question every assumption about the nature of the impossible." The morning light was beginning to filter through our familiar windows when the bell below rang twice in the quick, urgent fashion that foretold a client with an untidy problem. Holmes's eye brightened immediately. The languor fell from his figure like a discarded theatrical costume. "Another curtain about to rise," he murmured, reaching for his coat with renewed energy. "Shall we descend, Watson? Perhaps this time we shall encounter a case where knives cut cleanly and truth requires no mechanical revelation. Though I confess," he added with that dry humor I knew so well, "I have developed a distinct preference for the reverse." I laughed despite myself at the paradox and followed him toward the stairs. The case of the knife that never cut had concluded with the triumph of scientific investigation over elaborate criminal deception, yet it had also demonstrated the remarkable lengths to which human ingenuity will extend when motivated by wounded pride and systematic revenge. In the end, justice had prevailed not through dramatic revelation alone, but through the inexorable logic of facts properly interpreted and the persistent application of reason to seemingly impossible circumstances. The fog had lifted from London's ancient streets, but I knew that somewhere in the vast metropolis, new mysteries were already taking shape, waiting for the unique genius of Mr. Sherlock Holmes to illuminate their hidden truths.